The news, of course, this week, Secretary Redding, you've been nominated for a third consecutive term as Ag Secretary. What do you hope to focus on in the next 4 years, and will people see continuity with what we've seen through the Wolf administration?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, thank you, and I'm honored to be Secretary and honored to be, nominated for another term as Secretary. I mean, I believe strongly that you get a chance to work in this business, and you're honored to do it. You get a chance to see every week, the types of folks who are in it and look around, same thing. I would say a couple of things. One is certainly some continuity in where agriculture fits within an administration and within a cabinet. I think if you were at the Public Officials Day or heard the Governor-elect Shapiro speak yesterday, that agriculture is going to play an even more important role, specifically around economic development and having its own sort of capital funds, which is something we've never had. I think the regulatory component that he mentioned has always been an issue of how do you get things permitted in this state more easily. And then I think the continuance of sort of the Farm Bill and some of those themes that came out. So yeah, I see a lot of continuity, but at the same time, it's not going to be about the status quo either, right? He was very clear in the discussions with me and the exchanges I've had about his expectations for where agriculture fits, both in the Commonwealth but also within the cabinet. And I'm really excited about that, and quite frankly, part of the appeal of serving again.
Yeah, and you mentioned a capital fund. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think and I don't know the specifics of what he would be envisioning, but we know that this is a capital-intensive business in agriculture. We have created over time several very specific funds. A first industries fund that came out of the Rendell administration. It got grouped with a Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority fund, but in that transaction, there was never enough money there, right? So when folks want to do, poultry buildings, want to expand dairies, you want to do processing, all good projects, but there simply wasn't enough funding. I think what he's thinking about is that's a good model. Maybe we create something separate from that, or you could add to it, right? It could be in the same umbrella. So I'm excited. I think that's exactly what we need to do, and keep making investments in farm level as well as processing.
Yeah, and throughout our talk, I want to, draw through your whole experience as Ag Secretary back through at least through the Wolf administration. And one thing I think is notable is that when you came in 8 years ago, you had this strategic plan that you wanted to sort of build everything off of. So take us back to that. What was the sort of vision for the strategic plan, and where that has taken the state?
Yeah, so and thank you for reaching back, right? Because I really felt strongly when I came back to the department that agriculture is changing so much, right? And the things that we were doing when I left, were important. And then you go to a college campus and you see things, right? And people who are 17, 18, 19 years old are there to study agriculture and the sciences and the environment and animal ag and plant science, all of those elements. And I'll tell you what, it was really sort of transformative to me that there were folks who were in higher ed pursuing a career in education and agriculture who had a different view, maybe, right? They saw things inside of ag that I didn't always sort of see. So that was sort of a wake-up call of sorts. And then coupled with, I had a great conversation with Governor-elect Wolf at the time about agriculture. And he asked this question to me. I was interviewing to be secretary, and he said, well, what is agriculture in Pennsylvania, right? And that's a question that we ought to be able to answer pretty easily. And I sort of paused because it was one where, when I was coming off of Del Val as the dean, was coming back into service. So what happened out of that was a real need to sort of look at what is agriculture, who is agriculture, where is agriculture. So we ended up working with the Team PA Foundation, the Temple Fox School of Business, to do an economic impact study. And the impact study was to do two things, basically, define agriculture and then quantify it. And a third derivative of that was, what does it need? And those things became really important. We established for the very first time 18% of our state's economy is agriculture and food, the number of jobs attached to it, and the economic impact of $132 billion a year. And that led us to then sort of farm bill needs, right? That's where the conversation started.
Yeah, and before we move on to the Farm Bill, is it common for state agencies to have a kind of strategic plan for the industries they serve? Like, do we have a state healthcare plan for the Department of Health?
So that is a great question. So one of the points we had made was that you've got a strategic industry without a strategic plan, right? And it's dynamic, but we had no plan for it. We had our programmatic pieces, the Department of Commerce had their pieces, but we had no strategic plan. So yes, it was very uncommon. The only similar one would be a transportation plan, but they use that for a 10-year horizon planning effort of where to put roads and development of infrastructure. But we're the only one that had an actual strategic plan for an industry that included the department, but it was for the entire industry.
Yeah, and as you said, all of this work led into the 2019 Farm Bill, 20-some million dollars the first year and has continued on since then. How is the Farm Bill making a difference? And what's the future of the Farm Bill potentially in this next administration?
Yeah, so the Farm Bill, we're in our fourth year, and when you look back over the last 4 years, there's probably $100 million of investment, new investment. That didn't come at anyone's expense inside the department, right? Looking at conservation and farm to school and organic production. We had the REAP tax credit component was part of that. Really a long list of really important things that correlated to the gaps that were identified inside the strategic plan, but also complemented the new definition of agriculture, right? Being inclusive, to have urban agriculture in that, to have forest products industry as part of it. So I think the impact has been significant in that it speaks to and continues to speak to where we knew we had to acknowledge key sectors of our agricultural economy, but had no way to do that economically, right? We had no way. I could travel the state and talk about urban agriculture as an example, outside of what we could do in the charitable food system. We couldn't make any investment in urban agriculture. I couldn't buy a shovel, right? And now we just announced this week, we've got $2 million in urban ag and great projects, which we could talk more about. When you look at farm to school, and farm to school being connecting our farms with our schools, that has happened because of the Farm Bill. So there's a great impact there. The ag and youth organizations, it's wonderful to see consistent funding, but also to be able to do things in our 4-H clubs and FFA and Manners and others that you simply couldn't do before. So I think the investments we've made are important. To be very honest, I think it'll take some time to know what a full investment in an FFA chapter, a 4-H club, or a business plan for farmers will be. So there's an initial gratification, but I think the benefits are longer term. It's like a dividend from the Farm Bill.
Yeah, and speaking of the long term, one of the other things you've looked at as secretary is building the ag workforce.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what that need is that you see, and what kind of positions are we looking at? What is the state doing to further that?
Yeah, so the ag workforce, again, it's been an issue. I think we can all sort of acknowledge that, through COVID, it was simply exacerbated, right? In the Great Resignation and all of these things that are playing out in society, we are not immune from, right? We're not immune from it. We had a shortage heading into COVID that simply got exacerbated. So when you look at different studies, and we've done this, on the short side, you're probably 70,000 new jobs that you need. Every time I say it, I think it's short, right? Because I think you could add a lot more to that. Every time you talk to another business, there's another need So I think the need for the workforce, talking about it in terms of what is it? That sounds odd, but what is the ag workforce, right? You have to sort of know who it is that you're including in that discussion. So it takes us back to the ag impact study, right? That was part of the strategy. It's had the benefit then to know, okay, when we say agriculture workforce, we know it's got the forest products industry, it's got food processing, it's agricultural production, it's the equine industry. So you have very specific needs. And then translating that to each one of them have their own sort of career components to it, different dynamics of it. So it's allowed us to really have an intelligent conversation and think about what the need is. We've come a long way, but there's a lot of work to do. It's investing in the FFA through ag and youth grants. It's investing in what we do through the ag apprenticeship programs. And Sarah Glagora, proud of having a workforce development specialist as part of the department. Having the governor recognize ag as part of the economy and having us on the workforce development board. To have agriculture in the workforce investment opportunity grant that's required to be submitted to the federal government. So I think the stage is set, and we continue to see interest in and the need for workforce. I think that's a high priority in the next 4 years. You've got several things. There's three parts to it as I sort of think about it. One, you have to inspire somebody to actually come into this business, right? I hope there's somebody who wants to do this job, right? Not my job. They can have this job, right? But I think part of it is getting people to want to work in production agriculture, work in the meat processing plants, right? Or wherever they are. You have to retain who you have, right? And then you've got a piece that folks who are in the workforce today, how do you attract them to your business? And those three pieces take different approaches for, I think, what we need to do, but it's in how we sort of identify the task going forward. Final point I would say, maybe two. One is that the state sort of system doesn't work well for agriculture, right? I don't think it wasn't designed around what we do, and I think the assumption was, much like on the economic development side, that agriculture just sort of will figure that out, right? That's one piece we need to work on. And two is to be very clear that I think that in the ag community, the immigration discussion is a piece of workforce, but it's not the whole. And many times we have confused immigration discussions and workforce needs with what the other jobs are, right? And I think that narrative has to be changed and be very targeted and specific about when we say workforce, because the public perception of the agricultural jobs is to a large extent defined by our discussion of immigration, I think. So making sure that people understand that this is a place for meaningful employment. We need to fix the immigration issue. We need folks who are seasonal labor and skilled labor, but we need all these other things as well.
Yeah, and speaking of one of those industries that has, a real workforce need, dairy, our biggest ag sector. The past 8 years have had some really tough times for the dairy industry. Not because of not because you were ag secretary or something. It was just the market. So, what have you done to try to revitalize the dairy industry in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, we joke in the department that dairy is about every third conversation, right? It is all the time. You're talking about dairy and what to do. But if you look at it over 8 years, we hit this really difficult spot. We've had the highs and the very lows in there, and we've tried to again be a little more strategic about what does that really look like. So there's a dairy study we did in, I don't know the exact years, but in the first term, the dairy study got us to the dairy investment program. The dairy investment program got us to the CARES Act funding and some of the things we did during COVID, and I think it set us up for them what we did in the most recent tax credit package, right? To have very direct, targeted investment to address what we laid out in the study was we need to attract more processing here, right? Support your base, right? Make sure we're attuned to that, work through the Center for Dairy Excellence and all, but make sure we're actually building the industry. And to build the industry, you've got to bring more processing, right, and more innovation. So I think we've spent a lot of time on it. I'm proud of where it's come to. I think it's in a really great spot, but we're still working on landing those processors that were the vision back 7 years ago.
Yeah, and that tax credit just came in the past couple months here.
Yeah.
Was that designed for a specific company or not?
So it has a company in mind, right? We were very strategic in that there's things we could do in workforce, you could do capital investments through other economic development programs, but we were competing with other states that were also, and ours also, it's a real-time discussion, trying to attract this processor to their state. And they were holding out tax credits, and we had no ability to do that. So we said, this is our opportunity. We're in the window here with the end of administration. We've laid the groundwork for all of this, the dairy industry. If the final step is making sure that in our quiver of arrows, we need to have a tax credit one, then let's do that. If you read the language, it's generic but specific at the same time. It's generic that it's tax credit for dairy. It's specific for new processing. Okay, so we set it up that at the end of the day, we hope this company, we can attract them here and they use it, but it's a standing tax credit that if for some reason that doesn't happen, we can use it in the future.
Yeah, Fairlife is the name of the company that I've heard thrown around.
Yeah, so I'm always hesitant to repeat it because I signed a non-disclosure agreement in the use of it, but I think they have said, I think they've raised their hand, but when I look at my signature on the legal document, I won't talk about it, but that's who, that company, that type of product, because it was the convergence of what the Dairy Futures Commission, I forgot to mention, it was another sort of piece over here where the legislature said, hey, we're concerned about dairy, what can we do to attract them? They had their own sort of Dairy Futures Commission work, but one of the recommendations there was a tax credit program and also making sure we work to attract the more dairy processing in Pennsylvania.
And at the risk of going a little too deep into dairy policy, over the past year you've provided some principles for reforming the over-order premium, which is this payment that dairy farmers get under certain circumstances. Obviously the over-order premium is not controlled by the ag department.
Right.
So what motivated you to get involved with that discussion?
Well, I think to be clear, it's not under the Department of Ag, and thankfully, right? I just say that, I'm glad we don't have it. But as we looked around, everybody who comes to the Milk Marketing Board has their own parochial interest, right? The milk dealers come in and make their case for the dealers, right? The co-ops come in and make their case for the co-ops. But at the same time, you've got a three-member Milk Marketing Board that has a consumer representative on it and two producers. And when you read the law, it is intended to say to everybody here, in Pennsylvania, everybody at the farm show who buys milk, for the right to buy Pennsylvania milk, you're going to pay a premium. So the department really felt strongly that, if we're going to ask every consumer in Pennsylvania to pay a premium, right, and this has been around for some years, then we should be worried about its collection and its distribution. And what has happened over time, it's a product of the marketplace, where the premium was first placed on milk. It was about half of the milk in Pennsylvania was used as fluid milk, right? We're now down to about 32%. That time has changed. So you had a lot more dairy producers. So today you have 5,200 dairy producers, 641 of them get the premium because they're selling their milk to a processor and to the retail. It's built up to the retail. But we have a lot of other farmers who are contributing to that whole marketplace that don't benefit or don't feel they benefit. So we took on the task, to try to do two things really. One is let's make sure that we bring all of the premiums out of the marketplace we possibly can and push it back into the dairy industry. And two, while we do that, is to touch as many dairy producers as possible, right? Not just 641, but 5,200. And we're open to a discussion to the board, to the Senate, to anybody about how we do that. But we really feel like it's the only place where you can extract a premium. We don't do it on potatoes, we don't do it on eggs, we don't do it on peaches, we do it on dairy. And I think that's a really important statement that we're giving somebody the right to pull from consumers an extra premium to keep Pennsylvania dairy here. And collectively, that's a responsibility that we have as a department. It's not a parochial interest one, but we're trying to get everybody together to unite the dairy industry versus divide it. And that's been our driving force.
Do you have a sense of, are you optimistic that we'll see reform this year?
I am always optimistic about this. I think it's set up in a way that, given the last sort of couple of months exchanges we've had, that there's clearly greater awareness in the dairy industry about the Milk Marketing Board and what it does and its premium and who's benefiting and who is not. Right? I am optimistic about the Senate, because there aren't as many changes in the Pennsylvania Senate as there are in the Pennsylvania House. But I think the expression from Senator Vogel, who's chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, and the minority chair, Senator Schwank, that they want to have hearings about it, tells me that this is not going away. There's still an open question about what the actual collection mechanism is and the distribution mechanism on the premium. But I really feel like 2023 is the year, right, to finally get this thing resolved. So yeah, optimistic.
Yeah, and speaking of something else that has not gone away, over the past year we've seen 4 million birds lost through avian influenza. Is 4 million an example of success at controlling this disease? With 4 million birds, is that like a symbol of success in controlling the disease?
Yeah, it's a difficult response to give, because I think there's a couple of ways to answer it. I'll just say, if you look at Pennsylvania's history with the high path AI, that takes you back 39 years, right? And at that time, we had more bird loss, more economic loss. So to come forward now almost 40 years with the density of poultry in Pennsylvania, $7.1 billion industry. And when you draw these quarantine and control zones, you realize just the significance of what could have happened, right? So while 4.4 million is always too many, it's 25 commercial flocks and about 10 backyard flocks. It could have been a lot worse, right? When we did the very first two positives in Pennsylvania and drew the 3-kilometer zones for control around number 1 and number 2, there were 300 poultry farms, right? 300 farms in 2 circles, to just give you some idea of density. So, yeah, it could have been. I don't know the total bird count inside that, but just by barns, it's a lot more than 4.4. So we've learned a lot from it. I think it's going to be another challenging spring. I'd love to say they're going to fly over Pennsylvania and just keep going. I think with the winter we're having, with the pop-ups that we've seen in backyards, you look around the country, it's still active. It's going to be a difficult spring. And I'm just thankful that we've got a system that recognizes that through the Animal Health Commission and a recovery fund, and I think where in my transition some continuity in that conversation, but we also need to have continuity in the USDA and APHIS. So I'm worried about it. It could have been a lot worse. I think for everybody in the poultry industry and here, it's why there's a display on biosecurity. That's the critical piece, right? It's avian. It has nothing to do with whether it's a commercial or backyard. It's the avian influenza. So we've got to be aware of that and do everything we can to protect the flock, if you will, here in the state.
Yeah, and another environmental concern, what's ahead with the Chesapeake Bay cleanup? You know, in the next 4 years of this administration, we're going to hit that 2025 deadline.
Yeah, you've got all these like tough questions, man. This is, I would say, so I was with the Appropriations Committee and the Energy and the Environment Committee this morning, who were doing a meeting / hearing on this very topic about where are we, right? So we've got this looming deadline, we have historic funding, and we have all this momentum, but we still have really a heavy lift to get this job done. And I began my comments by saying, you know, the important thing is to go over to the conservation pod, right? Look at the rain simulator that the No-Till Alliance and Penn Ag Industries has done. Take a look at that, because at the end of the day, that's the changed landscape. The whole reason that display is here is to make sure that folks have an appreciation for what we're doing, and it translates all these words of water quality and bay to the land, right? So to answer your question, I said there was a couple of things. I think the conversation is as positive today as I've seen it in a very long time. I think it's set up in the right way. People feel good about, you know, what they're doing, the conservation work they're doing. Farmers are you know, they're on board. We need to make sure that two things happen. One, we get credit for every ounce of, you know, work that we do, every ounce of work. And two is you can't have interruptions in the flow of money, right? These projects are very complicated. They're multi-year. You can't work on an appropriation year. So that what makes the Agriculture Conservation program, the ACAP program, such an important part. It's a 3-year run, right? Statewide, targeted funds to where the problem is, but it gives you some predictability so you can hire people, right? So you can plan in the farming process. I can't do it this year, maybe I can do that piece next year. So I feel good about it, but I think there has to be a general acknowledgement that that deadline is, as much as it's looming out there, there has to be an acknowledgement that it's going to take more than to 2025 to get this job done, right? And as I said to the senators, it's nice to have money appropriated, but you can't appropriate time, right? It's the other sort of piece of the balance. It's money and time. It's no longer about willingness to do it. I think we can do it. We've demonstrated we can do it, but we need time, we need money. They could appropriate one of those. So I think it's a healthy conversation. The final thing I would say is, and I was pleased to hear the governor-elect yesterday say it at Public Officials Day, the whole regulation piece, the permitting piece, is so central to getting the job done, right? There are multiple sources, multiple agencies, overlays. We've got to make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. We build systems to keep people from doing bad things. Let's build systems to do the right thing, right? And it's a change of approach. So I'm really excited about that. I was pleased to hear him say it because it fits in to what we do in the Bay. How do you get it done, right?
Yeah, two more questions here. You know, 2 weeks ago, the department brought out guidance on siting of solar farms, or if you want to call them farms, solar arrays. So, you know, why go this route with guidance that's just, it would be a non-binding document? Is there a plan to look at, you know, legislation or a state oversight or anything like that?
Yeah, so we felt the guidance was at a minimum something we should do. We were overwhelmed, with questions. This has been, almost years in the making, but particularly months in the making. And we've all watched this sort of volatility around what's playing around Pennsylvania. And we felt like we should protect, one, the prime agricultural lands that we've invested in through farmland preservation. We should support those farms in the Clean and Green program. We should support the farms who are trying to protect it from development, whether that's single family housing or big box stores or whatever. Let's give them some guidance to help do that. But it is only that, right? But it was done in the spirit of, in a state with 58 counties that said we want to protect prime agricultural lands, which is by classification 1 through 4 of our soils. Stating to counties and municipalities, we can do both, but let's not put the solar on our prime agricultural lands. Put them on the other classes of soil, right? We've done 600,000 acres of prime agricultural land. Why rush out with solar and put it on prime land? And you're creating competition for that land, number one. And two is you're creating competition for the farmers who are leasing that land. And I think that's worth a public conversation about, is that really the right way to do it? I've defended just because since we put the guidance out, folks are saying we're anti-solar. To the contrary, it's about being pro-agriculture and pro-good land use, right? And then you fit the solar in among that. And there's plenty of soils around Pennsylvania to put solar. I've seen them. You've seen them, right? Now, I've been reminded it's a private property rights issue. So to your point, when you get legislation, I don't know. Because I think part of this is around what the private land uses are, and that's been a really difficult thing to legislate to do. But I would certainly encourage the House and Senate to, take whatever the next step in a regulatory structure to protect those prime agricultural lands. At the same time, support solar expansion. But so we try to put it out to give some hope, give some guidance. A lot of municipalities, to their credit, were asking, so we wanted to do that. But at the end of the day, the only thing to protect these prime agricultural lands is to preserve them. You're not going to get it all done through preservation. You can do a lot through zoning, and we've said in municipalities, there's your answer. If you don't want it there, then tell people that you don't want it there, right? And that's the piece that we bumped into. You have to have some intelligent conversation with them. Otherwise, you get everything everywhere. So I think there's a better answer than maybe what we've given, but it's a good start.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap up our time here together, what do you think the future holds for Pennsylvania agriculture?
Yeah, I am more excited about agriculture today than I've been in my professional life, right? It has nothing to do with the number of issues or pressures. It's about what I see in terms of opportunities, right? When I look around and you see, poultry growing and protein consumption growing, and you see the appetite for dairy processors to come to Pennsylvania to establish. When you go into the urban centers and people are in all kinds of agricultural pieces and food system, when you see, controlled environment agriculture establishing itself in Pennsylvania, I'm excited about that. When you have more farmers in PA under the age of 35 than any other place in the nation, I get excited about that. But we know that we've got these wind and heavy frontal winds of change that we have to sort of be prepared to deal with, right? And I'm excited about being part of that conversation, but also recognizing that there's a whole lot more that we need to do from a public policy standpoint to invest in agriculture, try to support every generational transfer that we can possibly do, connect everybody back to this food system that we can connect to it, make sure we invest in our brand, the PA Preferred, right? Making sure that we add value to that. And importantly, as I've heard this week, the role of agritourism. Right? We've got something special here, right? And it's not a substitute for, it's in addition to. And whatever we can do to add value to that, having people appreciate it, invest in it, buy a product from it, long term is part of our diversity, our sustainability, and I think it's an exciting and just amazingly exciting time to be in agriculture.
All right, Ag Secretary Russell Redding, thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Phil.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, thank you. Appreciate it, thank you.